The deeper and deeper I go, I find what it is I should know. 'Cause it's just a matter of time that you'll reawaken your mind. Oh, come with me, come to know and find out what is true. Then you'll know what's in store just for you. No more living a lie. I can look to the sky and say, I'm reawakening mine. Come to know and find out what is truth, yes. Then you'll know what's in store just for you. No more living a lie. I can look to the sky and say, I'm reawakening mine.
Happy Holy Day, Moors. Welcome to House of Reawakening Minds. House of Reawakening Minds exists to provide for the exploration and practice of spirituality in an enlightened community dedicated to honoring the myriad of sacred pathways to the universal creator. We are a holistic center for spiritual grounding, free thought, self-discovery, and Moorish science, an awakening experience for all ages. Tonight, I am pleased to present to you once again our National Grand Sheik, Taj Tarik Bey, as he presents a look at the Discovery privateers. But before he begins, please be sure to like, share, and if you have not already done so, subscribe to our channel. Now, let's receive National Grand Sheik Taj Tarik Bey.
Islam, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom, Vadimakum. We're going to continue a lot of our clarification concepts for the sake of people who are awakening to the true history of Al Moroccans, and many of the people who are on the platforms of trying their best to aid in the helping to uplift fallen humanity, and particularly the people of the North Gate, i.e. Northwest of Mexico, i.e. the Maghreb, i.e. North America, the North Gate, Morocco. And we want to talk again about some clarity of concepts, because many people look at a restoration or a challenge of the maritime and admiralty jurisdiction set forth by what is known as the operations of the Holy See, known as the Pope of Rome and the Bishopric Order, and their bullas, which have been operative, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, which includes all of the bullas in general, which would be Unum Sanctum, Dum Diversus, Romanus Pontifex, Inter Caetera Divina, the Sister QV Act of 1666, etc., collectively known as the Doctrine of Discovery. So the Doctrine of Discovery itself is a collective psychosis and operative mandate, actually, of the collective Roman bulls, etc., against the Moors. But in general, it's made reference to the bulls by the popes relative to the what they refer to as the Spanish Inquisition, and the claim of the Constantinians, who have been operating under the guise of Christianity for many generations, and must be comprehended by people that the common presentment of colonial operations at North America by the Christians claiming the lands of the Moors, i.e. the Muslims and the Aboriginal indigenous peoples, under the Bulla of 1453, etc., right on, must be comprehended that Spanish is used in the history to cover up Moorish history of the Asiatic African tribes, etc., of the Aboriginal peoples. And so when you hear, or when they present the quote unquote phrase and term Spanish Inquisition, they're talking about the Inquisition against the Moors. That must be clear. And then, of course, when they began to refer to the Aboriginal Naga and Dravidian tribes of Moors that come from Asia, etc., they started reconstructing the designation of the peoples of the lands of the West of Old Mexum, or sometimes referred to as Olmec, refer to us as Indians. And that terminology started or was propagated mostly in the islands in Americana, Tobago, Borican, what you call now Trinidad, Jamaica, etc., in those areas, etc. And then later, the term Indian was propagated and pushed into the reconstructed history for the Moors of the North. And so the term Indian and Indian tribes, though not proper, is another term that makes reference to the Saracens, etc., which are essentially Moors, etc., and the claims through their doctrine of discovery of claiming our lands and our estates, which has been practiced even up into this day. And of course, as we're speaking now, it's 20 and 22 by the Gregorian calendar, which was also adjusted and adopted to cover the operations of the wars against the Moors under the Spanish Inquisition. And you'll know that as the fall of the Red House, 1492, which is why that year is used by scholars around the world as a transitional period or an axis period of the fall of the Moorish Empire into the hands of the Germanic hybrid European tribes, etc. And this has to do with those of you who already know the history of Boabdil and the ceding of the Alhambra to the hybrid Europeans in order as an agreement for them not burning down the Alhambra, which is considered and is registered as one of the wonders of the world, 7 wonders of the world, even to this day. And much of the Alhambra is actually used and visited by peoples from all around the world to this day. And this is why when they begin to alter deliberately people's consciousness on how to look at history, why they started putting things or referring to things almost totally in linear line history formats, and removing any concepts of cyclical chronologies, which is part of the culture or the original cultures of the people, which causes logically misconceptions and in timelines, etc. So that all that must be taken in consideration when you're looking at the politics and the social engineering that takes place at North America, particularly to this day. And so when you're talking about the adoption, as a matter of fact, of the allodial nature of the Constitution for the United States, etc., you will have a greater comprehension or cognitive comprehension as to the motivation which many people, scholars of law and civics, recognize in this day, the modifications of the principles, not so much the principles as stated, but in its operative form, where you see the hybrid Europeans change the Constitution for the United States in a title form to the Constitution of the United States. And that has motivation due to the fact that the nature and the concepts of the Constitution for the United States did not originate with the hybrid Europeans, but indeed was adopted from the Anansi Confederation of Phoenicia here at the north of Mexum, commonly referred to as the Iroquois Confederation. which is another way of also burying the history or distorting, or what you would call corruption of blood, for the point of altering people's concepts of the origin of that Constitution, that people who really recognize allodial principles distinguished from feudal law operations that is common with the hybrid Europeans, and logically the conflicting governmental operative nature of those two forms, you'll have better clarity, understanding, or comprehending their motivations of altering that doctrine. Now, again, a lot of people knowing the principles or the nuances used by the hybrid Europeans to claim the Constitution for themselves, and who have adopted the idea that it originated with them, would come to a conclusion that the Constitution does not apply to the Aboriginal people. However, the nature of that Constitution does, because that's actually come from fatwa, or what is known as Muslim law, etc., from the Anasazi Confederation, and those would include the Mohawk and other tribes, etc., Seneca, etc., Mohican, most of the Moors who operated in this north area of what you would call, what is now called the Empire State, Massachusetts territory area, Shakyabi territory, what you call New Jersey, Shakamoxon, that Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area. And keep in mind, when you're looking at these different territorial, geographic territorial positions, you must know that the political jurisdictions or artificial lines drawn in your political jurisdictions that you know today were not in place as you see them on the Mappamundi that they show you today. But these confederations of the Phoenici, from the north to the south, whether you're dealing with the Algonquian Confederation, and or the Anasazi Confederation, etc., you'll see the adoption by the hybrid Europeans, disguising a lot of the construction adaptations as the so-called Republican and Democratic parties, etc., as an imitation. This is why it's very important for people to have a clearer comprehension of the origins and the nature of what you know today as the Democratic and the Republican parties, and also why it's important for you to have some background knowledge of the Whiggamore Party, the Conscience Whigs and the Cotton Whigs and their split, etc., including the convention that was held at Shakopee territory, at the Shakamoxon territory, what you call Philadelphia, around 1854 to 1863, with the Germanic tribes of hybrid Europeans, where, and this is why over the years we've always reminded you to ground yourself in a synoptic history of the operations of the Whiggamore Party, particularly with Horace Greeley coming into that party, and knowing that in the 1800s, actually, this is when the hybrid European Germanic tribes started referring to themselves as white people. And so when you look at how they write the history of the Doctrine of Discovery in these days, they will backtrack and put the perspective into the history of the hybrid Europeans claiming the lands and the states of the Moors, i.e. Aboriginal peoples, via the Doctrine of Discovery, and make often statements of themselves as being white people, when in fact they were not officially even referred to as white people until after the convention of the Whiggamores, and the adoption through the convention at Philadelphia of 1854, when they were encouraged to start calling themselves white people in order to claim the estates, because white, keep in mind, is not a complexion. White is a law status that references basically sovereigns or rulers of the land. And this would justify, even though falsely or under a color of operations, their claims to the estates and to the lands. Now, when they write about these operations of the Doctrine of Discovery, including their operations with the Johnson versus McIntosh case, and that's a 1823 with the Supreme Court case, which they operate even to the day. They will refer to themselves, as they write about it, as white people, i.e., the white Christians, given sanctioned by the popes of Rome under the Doctrine of Discovery. That would cover all of the church bulls to claim the lands and the estates of the Moors. And this is why you see the practice till today. They'll cover up the practice of the Doctrine of Discovery under the guise contemporarily of race and prejudice, or what they call racism and prejudice, which is also a misnomer and also an alteration of the true history and the corruption of blood and the corruption of the true doctrines or the true record. So you must look at, when you're looking at the cases, and that would be a prime case that many people look at when they make reference to the Doctrine of Discovery and the gentrification of our communities, etc., that has been the practice, etc. This would be including with the bombings of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the nature of the bombing of the Moors, of the families of move in recent years at Philadelphia, Shakamoxon territory, the different things that they have done consistently under their Doctrine of Discovery. And this is, again, why, for people who don't know the real history and the corruption of blood, are not aware that a lot of the abuses that are perpetrated against the Aboriginal people have their root in the Doctrine of Discovery, and that racism is a cover-up for that operative color of law and color of authority operation, etc. And so I'm presenting that to you because a lot of people who really don't know the origin of the allodial character of the Constitution for the United States would totally disengage the nature of it from the Aboriginal people, when the nature of it originates with and from the Aboriginal people and adopted, not created by, but adopted by the hybrid Europeans. And of course, when you look at Article 3, Section 2, and you deal with the consular issue of the diversity, then you comprehend why that is also not promoted from a civic perspective for the people of the land who have been continuously genocided according to the Doctrine of Discovery, etc. And whenever there was a case of controversy, the Supreme Court would rule in favor of the corporate states, etc. And keep in mind, the corporate states are not the republic states under Constitution. So you must recognize that while they will use or justify, when they're doing historical review of the hybrid Europeans, using the unanimous Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as a basis of claiming authority, they will at the same time abridge it. And this is why you will not see or hear them saying Constitution for the States United, which is really what it actually is. So the Constitution for the States United is commonly known or presented to you as the Constitution for the United States, which of course has fatwa at its base. And so when they make reference to their claims or justifications of the abuses of the Aboriginal people, i.e. our ancestors and ourselves here on our land, etc., why they hide commonly behind claiming themselves to be Americans when actually they're hybrid Europeans. And keep in mind, Europe was not theirs either. Europe is Iberia, which they all overtook and have been genociding out Picts and the Maoris and the Dubs, who are the Aboriginal Moors of Iberia, i.e., the true Europeans. That's why I make the distinction when I say the hybrid Europeans. The hybrid Europeans would also be referred to as sometimes Paleolith or the Paleface, etc. Distinguished from the truer Europeans who are actually Iberians, i.e., Moors. And so they'll cover up in the history of their theft of the estates, and they remove the E, and that's where you get the term states, etc. And they incorporated them, etc., to be for transferring, or what you would call converting, the estates of the Aboriginal Moors into the jurisdictions under Admiralty law to the corporate states, which are not constitutional states but are actually foreign jurisdictions, etc. And surely this practice has been executed even to this day. And so when you're looking at many people who are talking about the social engineering operations that have been taking place at North America, and they ignore the foundation of this operative history, these facts that we're presenting to you, or somewhat distorting some of these facts as they present the history, and you'll see them practicing or constantly practicing or hiding the operations of the doctrine of discovery, current politics, etc., under, i.e., racism and prejudice. And this is why, if you're conscious of the real history, you dismiss arguments that are presented under racism, which is a cover-up for the doctrine of discovery, etc. So I wanted to bring that to your attention so that you can look at this more properly. And again, as a reminder to put things in perspective, when you're analyzing corruption of blood and corruption of concepts, that the hybrid Europeans, officially as they have practiced to this day, agreed under the Whiggamore Party to call themselves white people. And so you look at that from 1854 with the Knights of Columbus and Ku Klux Klan oath, 1854 at convention at Philadelphia, etc. So you must look at that and keep that as a reference point in context whenever you're looking at the history, and also when you're analyzing current politics. That's very, very important. And so for those of you who are less familiar, again, we say look at the Johnson versus McIntosh case, or of 1823, to give you a concept of their operative activity today. So whenever any politician, doesn't matter who they are, whenever any so-called civic leaders, etc., of any particular groups, that matters not, at North America, starts talking about the history at North America and the abuses of Aboriginal indigenous peoples, and don't tell you the truth, that it's actually the doctrine of discovery and not racism, etc., that racism is a cover-up for the doctrine of discovery to keep you off point, to keep you off concept of point, etc., that their motives are not necessarily in the interest of honor and truth. And so we're telling you, because we are the people of the land, and it is the people of the land that must start speaking up and telling the truth about our own history, and not just from the view or the eyes of colonial descendants who always, usually, except for very few, who will color the history in order to continue the enjoyment of the virtues and the estates of the lands, the peoples, and the resources that don't belong to them, etc. And so that while that theft of birthright continues in practice, etc., don't allow them to hide behind some moral dispensation of history and covering it up with the statement or the mind control MK Ultra operations called racism, and those principles are the phenotype principles adopted from Carlos Linnaeus, Frederick Johann Blumenbach, and also Sigmund Freud, etc., which was all adopted into the education systems, etc., particularly since 1902, with Frederick T. Gates and John D. Rockefeller, which also has been damaging to the people, because when they begin to look at the history to comprehend, to have some kind of comprehension of analyzing the politics, past and current, they will be set off track by virtue of not knowing some of these points that we're presenting to you. And also, as a reminder, this is why very often those who know will remind you whenever there's a controversy between the Aboriginal Moors, etc., Al-Moroccans, because remember, Al-Moroccans or the Americans are actually Phoenici, i.e. Moors, and that includes all of your tribes that have been called erroneously Indians, etc. But that's a diversion also. And keep in mind, when they make reference to Indians, then they'll make reference to, without saying it, to the Dravid tribes coming from North Asia, etc., which their origin is from Middle Ancient or Mexim that you call Africa today, etc., from Nubia, Sudan area, etc. And so you must know the connection between Asia Minor and Asia Major in order to also know the history of the people here at the North. And that's why when you start doing research, you'll see the culture or in the traditions, including different structures in clothing, etc., and styles were absolutely similar and derivative. And this is another reason why even in sociology, when they're teaching in school, they will not make comparative traditional dress available to the people, because you would recognize the similarities and the direct connections immediately if you're not distorted or if you're not distracted by the narratives that are presented by the narrators who have been controlling contemporary history and communications. And this is again why it has been necessary for the hybrid Europeans to burn books, to hide books, to sanction, to neuter, to alter, and to actually block informational communications between Aboriginal peoples, so that you would not recognize your connection to the entire planet, etc., Midgard. Because it is necessary from their position of world conquest to distort the history and to also put things only in a linear format, so that the people would not recognize the cyclical nature of life itself, and of course the keeping of the chronologies by the Aboriginal people and the way we would view things, and our connections to nature, and the way we would view things according to cosmology, etc., which is why the nature of thinking has been suppressed and also not openly conversed, except in their secret societies, for the sake of protecting their artificial rulership and their artificial constructs and their implied but not valid in law contracts, and also why they will consistently use terms relative to jurisprudence under the guise of legality and not necessarily properly as lawful, etc. And that distinction must be made. And of course, these are just some of the little tricks and semantics that are used to disconnect the people from self-obligation, from self-government implications, or the desire for our people to self-govern, and also the artificial guise of promoting consistently over the generations the fictional 14th Amendment U.S. citizen paradigm, in order to legally but not lawfully regulate the people under commerce, i.e. stock, the people themselves being what is known and what you will find in their own congressional records as human capital. And you'll find that when they're making up their so-called U.S. budgetary operations, you always see buried within their documentation human capital, and because their business, i.e., the United States Corporation Company, distinguished from the republic that they themselves overthrew in 1861 with the assassination of Lincoln. And most of you who are scholars already know, without doubt, that Abraham Lincoln was the last lawful president for the republic. And of course, even after they continued their Doctrine of Discovery operations, which is why the conflict arose relative to the issues that they talk about in the alleged Emancipation Proclamation and the 40 acres and the mule issue, because of the enforcement of the Doctrine of Discovery, which is why the Aboriginal people never received their 40 acres and a mule as promised to some of our people being held under forced servitude under the Doctrine of Discovery. Why? Because if they enforced it, they would have given not only the land back, but more than all of the land back. And so this is, again, via the Doctrine of Discovery, why the 40 acres and the mule issue was never honorably addressed. Also, the motivation behind the hybrid Europeans squashing the what is known as the Freedmen Bureau, or the Bureau of Abandoned Lands, and also why they refer to our lands as being abandoned, because under the Doctrine of Discovery, they claimed that we didn't exist, and that by the Constantinians claiming to be Christians and the descendants of the murderers of the prophets, claiming therefore the life of Jesus, and therefore claiming the authority of Jesus, and therefore claiming to be the society of Jesus, claim their right to murder anyone else who, like Jesus, had hair like lamb's wool, skin like burnished brass, as demonstrated in the Heliotheca, which you know is the Berber Bible history, etc. And also why they alter the concepts and the views, anthropomorphic and otherwise, of the Yeshua principle or the character of Yeshua as they present as Jesus. All of that has to do with their Doctrine of Discovery, including the motivation of the priests and the preachers not to tell the truth about the alterations of the Bible out of the Septuaginta, and the alterations and the removal of multiple original script and books from what you know as the Bible. However, although it is still Berber in its historical take, they have altered or modified enough to keep the people confused, and also for many of the people to reject. And as a point of reference too, for many of you scholars who are out there, many of you never knew that Fatima and Muhammad was also in the Bible, and that has been removed. And so when most of the time, if you make reference to Fatima and Muhammad as an example, the people think only of the Quran, Holy Quran, etc., and other holy books, etc., of the Eastern peoples, etc. However, that's a fact. And as you do research, you'll find that to be true too. But you'll also recognize via the Doctrine of Discovery how the priesthood collectively has been corrupted. And I would suggest for many of you to do a little research on the motu proprio that Pope Francis did in 2013, when he called together many of the civic leaders from around the world, and also the so-called religious leaders. And you'll notice that that so-called leaders from all of the major world's religions, when meeting Pope Francis, were kissing his ring, regardless of their so-called religious claim, and you'll recognize again when you pay attention to details, the corruption of blood and the corruption that has been also instituted via all of the platforms that you have been calling religious platforms, all of which have, for the most part, for humanity, has been a front, because they've all been corrupted by the popes of Rome under the Doctrine of Discovery. And I suggest that when you do a little bit more research, you'll pay attention and you'll notice that why I said to you, note that they all kissed his ring. So when our people gravitate back to Islam and back to what we call Ibri, or what you call Hebrew, covered up with the word JEW, etc., you'll comprehend while the abuses continue and while the confusion continues and while the anthropomorphic nature of many of the characters in the books are not taught, so that you don't know that many of the characters are anthropomorphic for purpose of character building, but indeed, by fact, didn't exist in the way that is presented to you. However, the characters are part of the culture. And so that's important. So the Doctrine of Discovery, which is the collective operations of all the church bulls, etc., from 1453, 52, 53 on up to 94, etc., collectively being enforced against Aboriginal people, has done much damage to the human psyche and is absolutely operative in and via all the political forums of most of the governments of the planet to this day, absent of just of a few. And it has much of the root operations or conflicts or dynamics that you're experiencing in the political forums today, including all of the issues about trade, about inflation, and particularly marked by the staging of the actors who have been acting at North America for quite a few decades, actually. And so if you look at the politics that's taken place here at North America that is affecting and or infecting even other nation states or even other territories that have been designated as nation states, but are indeed by fact of law and legal process are not geographically acknowledged officially as nation states anyway, how these dynamics have been going on and are going on at present. And if you look at in more detail and do a little research on some of these matters that are taking place even currently as we're speaking, you'll find that a lot of these conflicts of territorial conflicts about different so-called nations are actually not nations whatsoever and are still being misrepresented to the masses for mind control purposes, but are actually behind them. The operations are actually still Doctrine of Discovery. So I want to bring that to your attention because also relative to some things we'll probably be showing you in the near future of some correspondences that have taken place, we're going to share with you to show you where restoration and reversion of estate operations are effectively taking place now. Some of the a couple of pieces of documents I wanted to present to you tonight, I don't have in my hand, but I will have very soon because of time and distance, etc., and correspondences that have been issued to a few active Moors who have been doing reversion of estate, etc., whose position or claim has been acknowledged by the Treasury Department, etc. And I know that many of you over the years who have made reversion of estate documents and writs have been somewhat frustrated as to the lack of due process by the colorable administrations of the corporate states of the United States, etc., being franchisees, is not to be disappointed. It is for you to recognize it takes the energies of the people to make in their cognate operations a reversion of a state in both their spirit and attitude of all their writings to begin to start to dismantle the operations of the misrepresented Holy See operations under the doctrine of discovery on the planet. And but you will see the effect taking place because the straw instrumentalities and the bottomry instruments that they have been using for trade that actually are instruments to claim the bodies and the souls of those who have been colonized and conquered are reduced, heavily reduced in their power of influence of trust, faith, etc., sometimes referred to as blind faith, private commercial paper instruments of bottomry that are used in world trade and international law. And keep in mind, the doctrine of discovery has been, for these last century, adopted in international law trade operations and are at the foundation of the U.S. Treasury bonds that has been the basis of their economic system, etc. So it has actually been the fiat claims of the doctrine of discovery that is the faith that is backing and has been backing the quote unquote U.S. corporation dollar, etc., which is why also the members of the United States Corporation Company, which has been bankrupted about 4 times, etc., they keep reconstructing it under the doctrine of discovery, and why the world in general has come to the conclusion that this cannot continue. And so logically, this has much to do with the constrictions and the trade constrictions that are happening today with the descendant members of the Germanic tribes who have been conquering and robbing people's estates under the doctrine of discovery, and the world becoming more and more conscious that the fiat currency that they've been using are actually tied to the doctrine of discovery, not to gold and silver, as commanded by the agreed treaties and constitution for the United States, which is again motivating from a motivational position why the hybrid Germanic tribe, hybrid Europeans absolutely will not acknowledge the Constitution for the United States, Constitution for the States United, and you'll always hear them say Constitution of the United States, etc. And of course, because the Constitution for the United States, i.e. Constitution for the States United, come from Honesty Confederation principles or fatwa, which Barack H. Obama mentioned when he spoke at Cairo, Egypt, when he talked about the Treaty of Tripoli and the relationship of the Moroccan Empire and the United States. This is also why those of you who may have in your possession, Henry Campbell Black's Law Dictionary, Ancient and Modern Jurisprudence, 5th edition, which would be the blue cover, because many of you scholars here that have been sharing here with us for years at the House of Reawakening Minds have a series of law books, including Bouvier's, etc. But in specific, for you to give reference to some of you to comprehend the operations of the doctrine of discovery and how sometimes they will slip up and hide things in in plain sight. Go look up estate in Black's Law 5th edition, and in your first or second paragraph, they'll say the United States and put right behind it Morocco in parentheses. So once in a while they slip up and let you know that the United States is actually occupying Morocco. The country is Morocco. The corporate operations of the colonists under the doctrine of discovery is the United States. This is why Aboriginal people, i.e., if you want to look at the Dred Scott case of 1857, and if you want to look at the Dungy case of 1852, 3, 4, etc., which superseded the Dred Scott case, Now you understand and comprehend why the Aboriginal people, i.e., the Phoenici, i.e., the Aboriginal indigenous people, cannot be U.S. citizens, no matter what they tell you, etc. And so, but they will muddy that argument always so that they can execute the doctrine of discovery for escheating estates, which has been the root of their commercial trade of humans, etc., under the guise of stock market, 55 Water Street, and Seed and Company, both of which you should write down and do a little bit of research because that's what's been happening to you. So that's a preliminary conversation about the doctrine of discovery to look at it more clearly, etc. In the different points that we've made to you, do some research so it becomes your own knowledge and comprehend that it's not mere opinion. So things that I want to point out to you in the conversation is that when people say that the Constitution of the United States don't apply to Moors, they're correct. The Constitution for the United States does apply to Moors. The Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, establishing consular venues for the diversity of the Aboriginal people who are not supposed to have ever been paying taxes, etc., should have been enforced, but it is the law of the land, supreme law of the land, see Article 6 of the Constitution for the United States. And of course, those ministers and consuls who are put in place in different organizations over the years for the restoration of the estates of the Moors, you will comprehend why certain things were written. As an example, Moorish Temple of Science, where you see Act 1 of the Moorish Holy Temple of Science and Moorish Science Temple of America, where you see that the sheiks and the grand sheiks, assistant grand sheiks, are put in power to make law, the moderators, the chairman, etc., and to enforce law if they live according to love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, and it is known before the members of the Moorish Science Temple of America, i.e., that is a general term used for the nationals, i.e., including those sympathetic people relative to the enforcement of constitutional principles known as citizens, etc., to enforce the law, i.e., to enforce the Constitution. And logically, that would be the proper consular venue and the preservation of the estates of the Aboriginal people, all of which has been breached. And of course, that those issues have much to do with different cognate or active Aboriginal peoples who have now been active for quite a few years on a higher level of consciousness, and has actually influenced many other Aboriginals around the world from other nation states to now become active to restore their lost estates, etc., which is at the root of current politics around the world. So I want to bring that to your attention, and so you can look at that more in a more refined manner, and also be conscious of all your communications with the hybrid European Germanic tribes, because they've been doing much as they can. Some of them have kind of reverted back to the principles of the Constitution to preserve their the least of their estates, although most of the states don't actually belong to them. And you'll look at that reflected in the operations, particularly at North America and Canada, and say England, etc., where the middle class has been dissolved. That's another phrase to cover up the fact that the organized P2 Masons in their subdivisional orders, etc., have taken the position of dissolving the middle class in order to protect their artificial rule that they've enjoyed for a little over 150 years at North America. And when you comprehend the operations of the Doctrine of Discovery, you'll understand and comprehend more clearly the letter that we mentioned over the years for you to look at, um, uh, assisting Pope Francis by Anna von Ries von Letlow-Werbeck as assistant attorney for that letter that was presented to Barack H. Obama from Pope Francis, giving a synopsis of both the history, the corrupt violations that are taking place now, and by implication, if you really study it carefully, you will recognize the political operations that are going on right now in these last 4 or 5 years that have come to the surface, that we have mentioned to you many times. And one of the things, when you start doing some research in some of our talks here at the House of Reawakening Minds, you'll have a better comprehension why I made the statement for the last 5 years to the Moors. Don't get caught up in mainstream misrepresented narrative. And I made the statement again, and I backed that up again today. Donald Trump was assigned. I'm not defending Donald Trump personally. I know the real history, and I know the operative politics. And that's what I'm actually talking about. And if you know the real history and the cyclical nature of our thinking and the mathematical calculations and cycle placement, most of you who consider yourself a little bit ascended and are more in touch with your intuitive mind, and some of you call yourselves spiritualists, etc., would have recognized it yourself. Not to misplace him as character, etc., in any manner, but to more clearly analyze the political platforms emanating from the Doctrine of Discovery. Some things that you were mentioning to me earlier too, Dr. Nayela, would you want to interject on that?
Well,
because I think it would be helpful, actually.
Well, I picked up off the shelf the new confessions of an economic hitman, and I remember actually seeing an interview, hearing an interview, I think on YouTube with this John Perkins. I think his first book was Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and then he did an update called New Confessions of It.
And a perspective, and this is back to where we talked before, and we're reminding people now as we speak. When you read materials like this, look at them and the activities as subdivisional activities of the Doctrine of Discovery. Now, give us your both analysis as well as the documents itself from an operative.
Well, from what I've gathered from the parts that I've read of New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, he has, his conscience got the better of him. His conscience got the better of him, and for years he had been sent in by what we would call the U.S., the United States, to various countries, mainly foreign countries, to make a proposal or make them an offer that they couldn't refuse. And I say that an offer that they couldn't refuse, he would go into poor nations he was being sent to poor nations that maybe had some type of wealth, maybe oil or resources, which is normally the case. The people might be poor, but the land might be rich in resources and so forth, and offer the leader an opportunity to bring in technology, to bring in infrastructure, to bring in all these things, and to take a loan out with the World Bank, which is really run by those families. The IMF.
Keep in mind, the loans were never money. They were always private, commercial paper, fiat, backed by the Doctrine of Discovery.
Absolutely. So, he would give them various and sundry scenarios about how they could come in and they and tell them that, well, we'll get if your brother owns a such and such, like there's an example here about John Deere tractor.
Yes.
We'll use your brother's company for all of this.
Yes.
We'll do this for that. But in the end, what they would do is bring in their own contractors, i.e. like a Halliburton and some of these ones that you heard prominent throughout the various so-called wars and conflicts on so-called foreign soil.
And even in conjunction with what you just mentioned, we'll add to that as a point of reference for the listeners, for you to do some research. There's been some suits that you will not hear in the mainstream news because many of these pieces of machinery that they would offer these other countries were chipped. And if they broke down, you couldn't fix them.
Mm-hmm.
And also by being chipped, they could also cause them to break down, i.e. by signal, electronic, by AI. And of course, that was again, so not only was the alleged worthless debt projected upon the people, but what they accepted from them was chipped, and they were not told.
Yeah.
And whenever they needed repairs, the machines would stop, and they could not fix them in the field. The same way they're doing the cars now. That's really old technology. However, that's an interjection on your thoughts. Continue, please.
Well, it said basically, like I said, they would offer them, and they would offer them perks for their own families. Maybe education. Bring your children over to the to over here, Maximum, and we'll get them. They'll get into Harvard, and they'll get in this
and then MK Ultra.
Right, and so that what they would basically do is when the leaders would get a conscience themselves and realize that they were selling out their people because they did not keep their part of the bargain.
Exactly.
And they were losing, and they were now having to cut back on stuff like health care and different things. Their people,
not just like that, they would do what they would call regime change.
Right, so they would actually give them a rundown of all of the other leaders who had failed to keep their part of the bargain, like
they keep
the president of Ecuador.
Meticulous right. Keep that in mind.
Right, they would mention people like Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba, and the various ones that were vilified and killed. They were murdered for being whatever, and they'll remind them about this stuff.
Doctrine of Discovery, and that would be unum sanctum and dum diversus.
Right. So basically, they owned them because they could never pay the principal. The interest kept rising. Now they got a foothold into these countries.
And keep in mind, interest on private commercial paper, not money.
Yeah.
And the other thing that many of the people didn't know, and which they need to know, is that these operations that have been done under the guise of Christendom, etc., or Christianity, were actually Luciferian. And so this is again why the priesthood, even in the communities of North America, where they would have the Luciferian orders on every other four corners of any four cities, and they would always hide behind the name Jesus, and people would not necessarily comprehend how the poor communities could possibly support all of these so-called religious orders within these poor communities, because they didn't know that these were really military operations. And this is again why they would do the Luciferian skull and bones support tithing, referred to as a 501c3 kickback agreement. And then again, they would hide behind Jesus to justify, i.e., the 501c3 tax exempt status guised under the religious order, which is really Luciferian platform, military operations under the Doctrine of Discovery. And of course, skull and bones symbolizes the dead, or the devouring of the candidate.
It's probably not unlike what happens right here.
Oh, because it
actually,
is. See, it
actually
is.
it's not unlike what happened here.
It's not looking or comparative. It absolutely is.
All right. So let me just read this. And this is about the countries that they would go into.
Yes.
It says they prospered and everyone else suffered. Money that had been budgeted for healthcare, education, other social services was diverted to pay interest on the loans. In the end, the principal, like I said, was never paid down. The country was shackled by debt. Then the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, hitmen arrived and demanded that the government offer its oil or other resources to our corporations at cut rate prices, and that the country privatize its electric, water, sewer, and other public sector institutions and sell them as to what he called the corporatocracy. Big business was a big winner. And here's the key. In every case, a key condition of such loans was that the projects would be built by our engineering. And when I say our, I'm talking about them. Their engineering and construction companies. Most of the money never left the United States. It simply was transferred from banking offices in Washington to engineering offices in New York, Houston, or San Francisco.
Among themselves.
Right. Yeah. So we EHMs or economic hitmen also made sure that the recipient country agreed to buy airplanes, medicines, tractors, computer technologies, and other goods and services from the corporations.
Yes.
And so they says, despite the fact that the money was returned almost immediately to the corporate members of the corporatocracy, the recipient country, the debtor, was required to pay it all back, principal plus interest. And if the economic hitman was completely successful, the loans were so large that the debtor was forced to default on his payments after a few years. And when this happened, the EHMs, which are economic hitmen, like the mafia, demanded our pound of flesh. And this often included one or more of the following: control over United Nations votes, the installation of military bases, or access to precious resources such as oil. Of course, the debtor still owed us the money, and another country was added to our global empire. And it's the same thing.
It's doctrine of discovery
done here.
See, because now just pay attention. So when you analyze the statements, this is a Curia member operative, right? So analyze the statement, and particularly when you're looking at this in order to put it in proper context. When it's our, they're talking about the order,
right,
which does not include you who are reading it. When they say money, they're talking about that which is never presented. It is only private commercial paper.
Is that like, say, the dead pledges we call mortgages?
That's what it's a dead pledge. So the promise is money. The deliverance is debt. And on the pretext of the doctrine, the debt is built. And therefore, the recipient or those who contract with them are declared dead. Then the officers of the corporation, United States, claims their body and their estate. That's called national debt. And then that debt is converted into other bottomry instruments. And then the bottomry instruments are presented as contract. Of course, the contract is linear, i.e., it has an offer without true substance, which means it's not even a contract. Yet it's accepted as a contract, and it delivers nothing, i.e., and it steals the resources, and by virtue of the value of the resource, covers any substance or anything, machinery, which is chipped, that's given to them. And this is why they do all the building contracts, etc. They control all the goods. No money is ever delivered, but it is said to have been delivered. And then they come for, quote unquote, what they refer to under unum sanctum and the doctrine of discovery, quote unquote, their pound of flesh.
They come for the heart.
That's what they do. This is why it's always said to people, don't make a contract with the devil. They're Luciferians. And don't be angry because they've never changed their pattern. There's never been a treaty or constitution that they've honored. And the deal of it is all of that's becoming starkly manifest on the planet with anybody who's ever dealt with them on any level. Many people have difficulty admitting to themselves and to others that they've participated in this fraud. However, it's become so destructive now that the whole planet, the people of the world, can no longer ignore it. However, many are still trying to rationalize with themselves that they're not being, conditioned by or under the doctrine of discovery. However, upon examination, it's not really hidden. It's just that the conditions or the outcome of the hybrid Luciferians coming for their pound of flesh, i.e., and also chipping people under the guise of helping their immune system, they're really getting the mark of the beast. And so when you hear these phrases, Lucifer, Satan, devil, dragon, and beast, all of them are, though have been contaminated by the hybrids, all of them are the cover of the doctrine of discovery operations that never ended. And of course, when many of you do research into the motu proprio 2013, you will see that they made the promise that they ended the doctrine of discovery. And as you can see, they didn't keep that promise.
No.
And so when you're looking at a lot of the political activity that's taking place on the planet around the world today, that you may be looking at from the view of how they are telling you that, know for surety, they're not telling you the truth. What you're looking at is the doctrine of discovery finally being rebutted by the nations of the world, nations of the planet. That's the basis of what's going on. And if you keep that in mind, you'll have a clear comprehension of the different actions that are taking place, the different responses that are taking place or that are being executed by different representatives of different nation states. And that includes China, Russia, India, Brazil, etc. And particularly what you've been hearing in the last maybe 7 years or so, the so-called BRICS nations, confederation. All of those are activities rebutting the damage and the false claims and the false debt, i.e. non-debt, imposed and constructed under the doctrine of discovery with this so-called pressure that's now put on the nations of the earth called the national debt, when in fact, no debt exists whatsoever.
Could the national debt really be the debt that's on the nationals?
Yeah, that's the whole point. See, and this is back to, when we, Dr. Natalie, when we talked about 7 years ago or more, when we did an analysis and we started telling the people, do rich and get in the state of mind of reversion of a state.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you get in the state of mind of reversion of a state, it creates problems for the bottomry instruments. You'll never capture them, although they put out promises that you would under commercial code operations, uniform commercial code operations. They will never relinquish them because they would have to give up the allonges that goes with them. And at that point, everything would fall apart because it would become obvious that they've been doing human trafficking. But they make the promise in order to kind of stretch their time, like buy time. Because remember, the strength of their bottomry instruments is rooted in the people's blind faith in them, i.e. the trust. When the trust dies, the faith dies, the artificiality of the instruments becomes apparent and no one wants to accept them anymore. This is actually the root of the political trade wars that are going on today. And the alleged debt by the Roman Curia members, as demonstrated in the Hitman articles, etc., which is a demonstration of confessions of an operative, a Roman Curia operative, etc., actually is an expose on the artificial debt on the nationals. And this is the whole point. So look at this, Dr. Nayela. We, via the Doctrine of Discovery, the hybrid Germanic tribes, i.e. hybrid Europeans, have been claiming the estates and lands of Aboriginal people. That's called conversion of estate. The alleged debt that is imposed by them to cover up the fact that they're actually stealing, etc. So they must cover it up by implying that via these alleged loans that a debt exists. And like you said, yes, this is where the term national debt comes from. However, upon analysis and comprehension of it, this is why I'll say maybe 10 or more years ago, we, as an example, among themselves operating here, even at Clearfield, Pennsylvania, why we make reference to the Clearfield doctrine so that people would have a better comprehension of them inverting upon themselves the same doctrine in their corporate operations, and where it's rebutted in the Clearfield case to show you and to demonstrate that they're a mere foreign corporation, misrepresented. And this is again back to our earlier part of this conversation, where people must make the distinction between the Constitution for the States United, also referred to as the Constitution for the United States, and the dynamics that arose after the assassination of Lincoln and the establishment of the democracy platform, or known as the U.S. democracy, and the democracy platform presented to the people, contrary to the Republic, contrary to Article 4, Section 4, and the promotion of the U.S. democracy in order to cover up their criminality, etc. And so this is why it must be important that when Moors are referencing the enforcement of the Constitution, they're referring to the Constitution for the States United, i.e. the Republic order coming from Fatwa, and the Constitution for the United States, which is Fatwa law, etc., distinguished from the Constitution of the United States, which is the alteration under the organic acts of Congress, i.e. Roman Curia members, and the setup of the U.S. democracy platform, i.e. which is actually a feudal law platform of human trafficking and tenancy, distinguished from allodial titles or aboriginal titles. And this is why, like a lot of times when they're talking about the so-called national debt, like you say, you must begin to comprehend that there's a distinction in the classification, the civic classification of citizenship, while nationals are discussed in the context of citizenship, that nationals are not citizens, and citizens are usually corporate. Nationals are consanguine, and categorically you would deal with jus soli, distinguished from jus sanguinis. So nationals will be jus sanguinis, and citizens would be jus soli. So the one is by the nature of heirship or birthright or blood, and then the other, jus soli, is by nature of legislation. And so after the Act of Congress, Organic Act of Congress, 1871, and this is why you see in the common dispensation of any controversy of natural beings or natural persons and property, they would not tell the people who were being put upon that you have a right to counsel. They would alter and say, you have a right to counsel. And then, of course, then they put a Roman Curia member in from the Bar Association in contradistinction to the what you will call the sovereignty clauses or supremacy clauses, etc. And because they know that members of the Curia of the Bar British Accredited Registry could not, by law, hold office under the United States Constitution, etc., and treaty law enforcement, both of which is the supreme law of the land. And this is why you'll find that 90% or more of persons who are claiming offices in the United States of America are indeed Bar Association members, contrary to the law.
So they break
And this is very subtle. However, the debts that they're claiming to be national, as you mentioned earlier, this is why you see United States Code of Law 95 subsection A and B demonstrates that the debt is not the people. The debt belongs to the United States Corporation Company. And this is why we remind people that when they're telling you that you're in debt, that not only are they lying, but in the Code of Law, it says the debt belongs to them. And that's why you never say us, because it ain't us. It's their private corporation. So the traps that they set for humanity has actually turned on them. And this has, again, much of the motivation as to why they've been doing these recent biological wars against the people under the guise of health, and are actually killing the people off because they have robbed all of the retirement funds of the people. They've robbed Social Security. They've robbed the U.S. federal employees' retirement funds, and they want to cover it up. And all of that is Doctrine of Discovery.
Well, we listened to a video today from Robert Beck that was 1990 video recorded in 97. Mm-hmm. And in 1997, he says that his then friend, who was the secretary of, I believe, the Social Security Administration, had admitted that they didn't. He was giving a small little device that was helping people heal. And he was saying, look, he said the Social Security Administration is not going to be bankrupt in 5 years.
About the mainstream news.
Right. Yeah. He said it is already bankrupt, and we don't need people to get to 65, and we need them to be in nursing homes and being, drugged and whatever. This is what he said. He said this was in 1997, and he also talked about, getting prepared because of the viruses, that the man-made viruses that would would be coming out, and that was in 97.
Yes.
So it lets you know,
as you see, I think as you were talking earlier, how even in the alleged conscious community, such information has still been restricted.
Yes,
because you already know that usually when people are becoming conscious of both political and metaphysical information, that the video trails will link, and these things will come up. And you notice that somebody must have put it up because
somebody shared it with me today. Whoever that was, I thanked them.
Yes.
I want to go back to, and even beyond that, Consul General Lamont Maurice and I speak frequently about different things, and even him posting the fact that he was able to show, I'm not going to say show the policy enforcer that stopped he and the sister was was navigating the conveyance, and by the time he finished, he was telling the policy enforcer, said, man, you're good, and have a good, he schooled him. He knew,
they all knew.
He knew, but then he realized that Consul General knew, and so he had to acquiesce and back up. And so it's like,
they all knew. That's Article 4.
When we don't know, they take advantage of the ignorance of not knowing.
Isn't that the Doctrine of Discovery?
Absolutely.
Claiming your estate.
Absolutely.
See, and this is why it's important for people to know that a state is not limited to aggregate land, because that's how they usually think. Most times when people hear the word estate, they're thinking about a big house, on a plot of land that belongs to a family. It doesn't dawn on them, because civics is not taught among the people deliberately, that it includes your hereditaments, your property, your rights, including your liberty. And so this is back to when you're making statement of reversion of a state, you need to really be clear on what you're talking about, because the doctrine of discovery steals or converts your estate to the Pope of Rome and the Bishopric of Rome. They do it under the disguise of the U.S. democracy. And this is why it's been necessary for them and other Curia members to keep promoting the U.S. as the country of the West that has been occupied under the Spanish Inquisition, which is Morocco. So Morocco is the country. The occupational Doctrine of Discovery platform is the United States Corporation Company, which we showed you the incorporation papers of. And this is why you won't see the corporation papers being shown to the public in general, because they have promoted falsely the concept that the United States is a country. And so even when people are talking about the politics, you'll see them keep mixing that in there, some consciously and some not consciously, but that must be undone. Again, why we're having this conversation tonight, a look at what? Doctrine of Discovery.
I was signing up for something and I was confused.
And privateers.
Yeah, I was like, these people put me down domiciling in the country of Oregon.
Yeah.
And I said, there's no such thing as, country of Oregon, but they were in Malaysia. And in Malaysia, they see each one of what are so-called states as countries.
Because they are.
And not as the United.
See, now when you're looking at proper structure, you see, all of these different territories are countries.
Yes.
And the countries come together in a confederation, i.e. now we're going back to Iroquois, i.e. Honesty Confederation, and a takeover by the Germanic tribes of the trade routes and the estates of the Moors, etc. And so they make the estates, the states, all these little semantics, which are really different, what you call provinces and territories and regencies, actually, that have been taken over. And then they create the federation. Instead of the federation or confederation, they convert it to the United States, i.e. then the United States is taken over, i.e. by the Curia members of Rome as the venue for conversion of estates. Thus, United States Corporation Company, etc. And which is why the United States Corporation Company, which is a conglomeration of hybrid European corporations, run from Davos, Switzerland, registered in Austria, presented as a country, i.e., which is now bankrupted because the nations of the world, after having been attacked under the Doctrine of Discovery, have found it no longer in their interest to continue the reconstruction fraud that has taken place since 1871. And so in different methods of their activities, they're rebutting all of the bottomry instruments that have been created for human trafficking on the stock market from Seed and Company,
and that's
i.e.
CEED.
CEDE, Seed and Company, which would include all the dead pledges, etc., on these transfers, upon which they created the U.S. Treasury bonds that were created on the backs of the Moors, i.e. tagged artificially as quote-unquote African Americans who were allegedly freed from the Doctrine of Discovery. They'll say slavery, Doctrine of Discovery, in 1865 with the Freedmen's Bureau, which never really took place. And the corruption continued to this day. Thus, all of the marriage certificates, the birth certificates, the mortgages, the CDLs, the registrations of conveyances, i.e., under the original manufacturer titles of origins that have been used to back United States debt, corporation debt, they've converted, like you said earlier, onto the nationals, to whom such debt does not belong.
So in fact, what they do is when someone would register a vehicle vessel, they basically are now putting it in their
power of attorney,
giving it over to them.
Yes, that's a power of attorney where you're transferring your estate to a FOFR. And so the FOFR presents to you that the FOFR is your trustee. But the FOFR is really a feudal law trustee, not an allodial law trustee. He's a feudal legal trustee. Repeat, feudal legal trustee, distinguished from, that's feudal legal FOFR, distinguished from allodial law trustee. The roles appear in its nature similar. They're not. I.e., the feudal legal FOFR is acting as trustee and saying that you have transferred power of estate or power of attorney to them. And this is why people who really begin to look at this and look at discovery privateers and their activities soon discover that the marriage licenses that they kept attributing to God and Jesus and to the honor of relationships in the divine, throw the rice in your eye order, etc., were really bank bonds. And that the birth certificates were actually what you would call baby selling. And then they would accuse the mothers who would sign these instruments as selling their babies to the corporate state. Now, of course, the corporate state is the Bishopric of Rome. You see how that works?
Mm-hmm.
And thus, this is the nativity, and then the foundation of right, because the babies could not sign for themselves, they would take the baby's foot and stamp the baby's foot on a certificate, which means an instrument of sale, i.e. birth certificate, and refer to the Holy See. And of course, you know the Holy See is the imitation of Horus, imitator, imposter of Horus, i.e. the Eye of Egypt. So remember, don't look at the Eye of Egypt as the Holy See. Look at the Holy See as imitating the Eye of Egypt, claiming capital dominion of Egypt, capital dominion of the Moorish Empire, and thus claiming the estate. Now, so the birth certificate and the marriage certificates are both claims on the womb and the seed of the womb, and the birth certificates are claimed on the physical bodies of the descendants that manifest in the physical form. So the marriage certificate is a claim on the seeds and the womb, seeds and ovary. And the birth certificate is a claim on the seeds that hatch. Both of them are called chattel, which is used in the stock market. And so the instrument that represents the stock trade for Seed and Company, etc., 55 Water Street, New York, etc., where they took over the trade routes, etc. That's why it's called the Empire State. It's sold on the world market in international trade. And thus, the U.S. Treasury bonds that have been used since 1862 for world trade that has become, fortunately or unfortunately, the reserve currency. Current is the water, it's not money, and electrical principle or the energies of the living transferred to the corpse of the dead, i.e. vampirism based on actual biological mathematics, conversion of estates to the hands of the popes of Rome via the disguised corporation called the United States Corporation Company, which is why it has been falsely promoted as, quote unquote, the country when it is actually not the aggregate land nor the Aboriginal people, but are imposters, impositioners, inquisitioners, i.e., totally fraud. So there is no national debt. Go ahead.
Something just struck me when you talked about the vampires. You know,
Yeah.
This is what struck me. When you see the movie of the vampires, a lot of times you have to then you invite them. You have to be willing. And so we've done the same thing.
Exactly.
Unknowingly invited them, or by acquiescence have allowed them access
via treaty.
We've done the same thing.
Look at the correlation as you just presented, right? So the major power treaty, that is the oldest running treaty in the current Midgard political international operations, called the Treaty of Peace and Friendship between the United States and the Moorish Empire, right? So you got the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, 1786, 1787, superseded 1738, etc., 1838, pardon. And then with the adoption, when you see in relationship to the adoption of fatwa, rule and law by the alleged founding fathers, etc., you're talking about Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin, etc., with Thomas Barclay as agent in business. So you see 1786, 1787, then 1788, the adoption of fatwa law by the hybrid Germans from Honesty Confederation. Fatwa law is the signing of the Constitution for the States United, i.e. Constitution for the United States, and then the ratification, 1789. So you see the sequence: 1786, 1787, 1788, 1789, and of course you would deal also in 1788, or just prior, 1788, you'll see the Northwest Territories Ordinance of 1787, etc., 1788. So you see the correlation. And so that's its absolute and direct correlation and relationship to the Aboriginal people. And of course, the clause for protecting the estates of the Aboriginal Moors, you will see, rooted in Article 3, Article 4, Section 4, and of course, Article 6, which would be the Supremacy Clause. And this is why, even when you see when Noble Drawley set up the articles for the acts for the Moorish Temple of Science, you'll see where Act 6, we're teaching our people their nationality and their divine creed. Then you put that in harmony with Article 6 of the Constitution for the United States United, and you'll see the protection of the Supremacy Clause, and which sets forth for the world that the Constitution for the United States and all treaties made or which shall be made before the adoption of the Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. Thus, the enforcement of the Constitution is the enforcement of the treaties. This is why you won't see them say Constitution for the United States. Say Constitution of the United States, getting off the platform to trick the people.
When should one? I've heard you say this before, but I'm going to ask it. When should one start the reversioner process? Like, say they go and they call themselves purchasing a house.
Yeah, well, it's like, because remember, and this is again why it's important for people to know. In reference to what you're saying right now, right? Let's go to like House Joint Resolution 192, right? As an example. And it's very important for people to recognize House Joint Resolution 192, because this is where there's an admission in discussion on the floor of the United States being a bankrupt corporation, and also that they're bankrupt, and also in correlation to the establishment of the old Canaanite temple for reversion of the state or the lost estate of the Moors. This is a political platform civic platform where Noble Drew Ali, commands to the Queen of England and to the bar members, i.e., those who have been running government, to honor their obligations to the law, etc., i.e., the enforcement of the Constitution. And you'll see the nature of their obligations, and also that they're making the distinction between the allodial titles that most people today are not even aware exist, etc. But it will show you that they are very aware of that the mortgages are frauds, etc. And so I'm going to pull a paragraph out of his speech on the floor, Traficant's speech on the floor of the House of Representatives. And then you can also look at this from the perspective of their motive of, neutralizing James Traficant a few years ago, and then saying in the mainstream news that he was working on his farm and his tractor turned over on him, which is not true. They eliminated him. But you already know they always do that. But so let me take a paragraph. I'm gonna take paragraph 1 and then take another paragraph in the middle of his speech before on the floor. Right? And then it'll become obvious your statement about the debt pledges, i.e. the mortgages, and keep in mind the alleged national debt. Excuse me, I'm having a little problem here pulling this in. But go ahead.
I have another thought too. With regard to the birth certificate, is there a time period when
always say birth certificate bank bond?
The birth certificate bank bond?
Bank
is there
bond.
a time period when a child who was not party to the original contract can go in and make a change on his or her status and nationality and they have themselves pulled out of that without?
They say that as people have become conscious, but keep in mind that's an implication of an obligation on your part for a construct created in color and in fraud that has nothing to do with you, to what you would call authenticated or seek a benefit by virtue of agreeing to a benefit within it, rather than speaking from an ex relation position upon the Sister QV trust and rebutting their claim. Sort of like if they could get you to authenticate it, then that removes your power of self-attorney or reclamation of a state in future argument for reparation. Because remember this, anything that's created in a fraud remains in fraud. Anything that's created in color remains in color. And then look at this. And I want to this is the United, for those of you who are listening, many of you already know this, but for those who are not aware, United States Congressional Record, March 17, 1993, volume 33, page H-1303. That's page 1303. This is Speaker James Traficant Jr., Representative of Ohio, addressing the House of Representatives. Mr. Speaker, we are here now in Chapter 11. Members of Congress are official trustees presiding over the greatest reorganization of any bankrupt entity in world history, the U.S. government. We are setting forth, hopefully, a blueprint for our future. There are some who say it is a coroner's report that will lead to our demise. It is an established fact that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act, March 9, 1933, 48 Statute 1, Public Law 89-719, declared by President Roosevelt, being bankrupt and insolvent, House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress in session, June the 5th, 1933, joint resolution to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the gold clause, dissolved the sovereign authority of the United States and the official capacities of all United States governmental officers, and departments, and is further evidence that the United States government exists today in name only. The receivers of the United States bankruptcy are the international bankers via the United Nations. So now you know what the Pope was talking about when he sent that letter to Obama. Now, this is the point that I'm making relative to your earlier statements concerning, i.e., the mortgages, right? And keep in mind, this year of 1913, Noble Drew Ali established officially the civic platform known as the Old Canaanite Temple for the reversion of the estate of the Moors and the enforcement of constitutional principles, etc., which logically includes the treaties, right? Quote unquote, prior to 1913, most Americans owned clear allodial title to property, free and clear of any liens or mortgages until the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 hypothecated all property within the United States to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, in which the trustees, i.e., stockholders, held legal title. The U.S. citizen, tenant, franchisee, was registered as a beneficiary, quote unquote, of the trust via his or her birth certificate. In 1933, the federal United States hypothecated all of the present and future properties, assets, and labor of their quote unquote subjects, the 14th Amendment U.S. citizen, to the Federal Reserve System. Now, when over the decades past, when we've been encouraging our people to do allodial title, do quick claim deeds whenever they did those transfers and reverted back to your own estate, which you have right to do, etc., which is the law, which is proper. Many of the people thought that we were, just talking loosely our opinions, etc., never knew that before 1913, i.e., before Noble Drew Ali set up the Old Canaanite Temple, all of our property was allodial and also known as aboriginal titles, etc., which are the only true titles of ownership. And after 1913, and of course, countermeasures done by the Roman Curia members, here comes your mortgages and liens. And back to what you were stated earlier about the hitman operations of the Curia members. Now, all of a sudden, the nationals of the land are in debt to the Federal Reserve. You see the whole point? Like you said earlier, it didn't just begin in other countries, did it? It started right here first, didn't it?
That's right.
And so, and this is back to if people pay attention to even the public record, the evidence is there. What you see, a lot of people who are politically compromised logically because of their compromission and hypocrisy pretend not to be aware of these documents, don't they? And then a lot of people that were put in positions in different organizations to make and enforce law tell these people, oh, we don't do the constitutional stuff here. You see why? See the motivation? And so now all of these people have been suffering, and their communities and their properties have been gentrified for decades, and they're arguing racism and prejudice happening instead of doctrine of discovery and constitutional enforcement, which should be the subject matter. You see the point? So when you do an analysis, when you take a look at the discovery of privateers, so privateering is also in reference to all of the Roman Curia members who are the heads of all corporations and LLCs under the United States Corporation Company franchise, and all of your corporate states distinguished from the state republic jurisdictions who have been converting the people's estates to their political platforms via these instrumentalities, i.e. mortgages and liens, sending them to seed and company, and then sending them on the stock market, which is the foundation of their financial system, is now being rejected by the rest of the world. And so now you see the inflation, which is actually a word to cover up theft by de facto government against the nationals and the citizens of the land, etc., into their coffers, that their instrumentalities and their bottomry instruments known as U.S. Treasury bonds, etc., are no longer being accepted. And the world is in a process, i.e. the nations of the world are in a process of what you would call rejecting the U.S. Treasury note as their reserve currency. And so it's creating all of these problems that you see today. Now look back at the motu proprio by Pope Francis, and with all the so-called religious leaders that was kissing his ring, and then look at the letter of 2014 issued by Pope Francis to Barack H. Obama, and then look at House Joint Resolution 192 with Traficant's speech on the floor of the House, 1993, etc., and you have a clear comprehension of the actual politics that you're looking at before your faces today, with the Nasara issue and the Gassara issue and everybody hating Donald Trump. And what the real motive is that they're covering up the fact that all of these people that you've been calling your congressmen and senators, etc., and all these political heads, including all of the so-called clergy, etc., were actually secretly in partnership, robbing the people's estates under the Doctrine of Discovery, and using both the U.S. democracy platform and hiding behind the name Jesus and Muhammad and everything else to rob the people, to get their trust, and when actually they're in partnership. However, it has caused so much destruction on the planet Midgard that it's become necessary for the nations of the earth, i.e., to reject their Doctrine of Discovery operations in a concerted collective measure. Thus, all trade on the planet is being interrupted, i.e., and what do they call her symbolically in the Bible? You know, they've all made deals with her.
The whore of Babylon.
And now, yes, and now the ship is burning and everybody's wailing. But all of them had contracts with her, as if they weren't a part of this corruption. Now is destroying their nations too. And so by virtue of them getting the pain, they're going to be forced to tell the truth. Remember, Joe Ali said, I'm going to make the European tell you the truth. And you'll see more and more hybrid Europeans across the world doing videos, starting to let out some of the real history of the overthrow of the republic, the fakery of the democracy, the bankruptcy of the United States Corporation Company, people's miscomprehension of this whole platform of history, etc. They're starting to tell you the truth. And we're just telling you a little bit more truth that we've been telling you for over 40 years, and that some people have been laughing at us for years. And however, we're not going to say I told you so. That does no good. We're telling you take more cognizance of your self-responsibilities and your cognizance to honor and help in the great missionary work of helping to uplift all humanity. By rejecting Rome, stop making contracts with Rome. They never honor them, and they're always coming for a pound of flesh. Problem is, collectively, the world is starting to turn against Rome. And so while they had every intention of eliminating 13 out of every 14 living souls on the planet, that's a fact. Look at the Georgia, those guide stones they put in Georgia overnight, and the people mysterious wonder where they came from. And they made a commitment under their Doctrine of Discovery and under Unum Sanctum operations to do what? To literally extinguish 90% of the living souls off the planet for the sake of the Pope of Rome, so that they could do what? Steal and retain all of these centuries of artificial claims on the estates of the people. They have come, the Luciferians, for their pound of flesh. Confessions of what? Hitman. That's what
Economic hitman.
That's so now you're looking at the privateers. Now the privateers is the classification of all of the heads of all the corporate entities who have been let loose, and particularly the members of the Bar Association, etc., to do what? To privateer on human trafficking, i.e., with no conscience whatsoever, even with removal of their estates, and then after that, the removal of their physical bodies to claim their estates. Thus, the fiction of the national debt and the pound of flesh in return for fiat. That's what's going on. And the world is now rejecting them. And the consciousness is people finally becoming aware of what's been going on, that it wasn't racism whatsoever. It's the Doctrine of Discovery. And the people who've been injuring you hasn't been some mystical devil. It has been the privateers, some who you know as the bishopric, the clergy, the Senate of Rome, the congressmen, the representatives, your entire political platforms of 90% of your governments on the planet are Luciferian. And they have been collectively, via their secret societies, plotting the theft of the estates of the people of the world, although the heavy root activity of it was initiated against us, the Moors, during the Spanish Inquisition. It has spread across the entire planet. Now everybody's affected by it. Therefore, to save themselves, some of them are forced to tell the truth. And what they're all in now is a quandary on figuring out how they're going to do this thing to undo the issue of those who are claiming to be us, John 8:44, and trying to resist restoring the heirs to their rightful estates, i.e., who they called the meek. So these passive people, who are the real heirs of the estate of the earth, i.e., must be noted in order for the rest of the nations to be saved. So while they're trying to save their estates, guess what? They're going to have to tell the truth about the true heirs.
And you think the lifting, the so-called lifting of some of these mandates,
which is not law,
happening
they're
because
edicts.
Edicts, they're happening probably because we're getting to what they call the midterms, and they're trying to change divert the ridiculousness from one thing to
Roman Curia members who have taken the positions of authority in all governments, because that's what it is. See, this is the deal. They may as well just come out and say it. All of the leaders and representatives of these quote-unquote different nation states are Luciferians and Roman Curia members. And the reason why the world is in the state that it's in right now is because those who knew and were benefiting from different comfort jobs that were given to them in the name of government, etc., weren't telling. But they didn't expect to be sacrificed to. They thought it was just going to be the Aboriginal people of the land under the Doctrine of Discovery. So now they can no longer make excuses about the dissolution of the quote-unquote middle class, can they? Because it's very, very clear that what their so-called elite are sacrificing them to keep power, aren't they? So this is again why when you study the history, the revolution almost always starts with what they call the middle class. Look at documented history, and here you go. So now, over the years, we've always encouraged people to rebut Rome. It's on. Go ahead.
No.
And so, yeah, and so we're saying to you that the privateers are all of your corporate heads, all of your heads of your big organized religious orders, all of your so-called civic, local, corporate supported organizations that have always been arguing, quote unquote, the race card argument. Those who have been promoting what you call political correctness, those who have been sanctioning or blocking transfer of information, are all part of the Roman Curia membership operations, i.e., privateers, and particularly headed by members of the Bar Association, British and American Corporation, i.e., British accredited registry, field operatives, members of the Roman Curia P2, Masons, etc., of the Vatican, exercising plenary power on the land under the guise of being American, when in fact they're American corporations. They are United States corporation operated from Davos, Switzerland. Thank you. So, if there's any questions?
Well, we're at the end.
All right. So take points, take notes, etc. And we want to thank you for sharing this evening with us here at the House of Reawakening Minds. And keep in mind, support the House of Reawakening Minds, because the House of Reawakening Minds is here to support you. Also, I want to remind you, call Dr. Ayala relative to your silver acquisition. As a matter of fact, update me on the issues of the silver. So I know they've been constricting it lately.
Well, Quicksilver still has silver, so it's still available, but the prices are bound to go up. Everything is going up, so you want to
for emergency.
Yeah, for emergency. So you want to let me just put that up here if they're interested in getting some information about that. And we do want to thank everybody for how they loved on you for your solar.
Oh yeah. I want to thank you all that shared my solar return February 14th from around the world, and I want to thank many of you who, through your good hearts, have sent gifts, and particularly many of the things that were creatively constructed, the art and the good hearts of the people. And I'll treasure all of you and your honor. So I honor you and thank you very much for sharing that evening with us. We had fun too.
Yes. So I got a couple of things though that I want to share. Of course, I want to talk about. I always have to talk about Chokeberry, because that got a call today from Brother Ali down in the DMV, and to tell me how much Capitol Heights, how much he loves Chokeberry, and how it has in the 2 months, almost 2 months he's been taking it, his blood pressure has reduced and so forth. So we want to say thank you to everyone who has already gotten their Chokeberry. I want to run the ad, but I'm also having a special brand sheet. This is my solar recur month, right?
Oh, that's right. Because we're going to do another celebration.
But that's not what I'm talking about. So what I decided to do was to say thank you, and I'm always running the scan thing about the AO scan.
Yes.
AO scan is amazing, and it has even gotten better. And so I decided for this month, and I can only do maybe about 2 a day if anybody's interested, that I would do scans, and I will do scans for 50% off the cost of the scan, the information. I don't know, you know, sometimes people get these things in the mail and they'll say life screening, and it's like, you know, 300-400 or 500 notes or something.
Yeah, a lot of that old technology, you know, is being exposed now, but people need to know that's old Egyptian technology.
Right. So the AO scan goes even deeper because it gets into the emotional side of stuff. And I literally went and scanned my sister, sister on Tuesday, which was her solar return, and she is in a nursing home and has been for about over 4 years. But I want to say that this technology is so powerful that it picked up the stuff that it picked up on her, somebody laying in a bed, you know, having, you know, not talking and so forth. Yeah. The information that I got from her, I really want to take it to her doctor and say, please take a look at this. Because, you know, sometimes when they're in a nursing home, I don't know if they do all the tests and the screenings, you know, women go for, we get texts for different things. Yeah. Well, this thing picked up things that even to the fact that things that said that happens when people are in nursing facilities, they get this kind of, you know, bacterial infections. It came up with stuff like that. So this is a powerful technology, which is our technology.
Yeah, I know. You know, and I was just thinking about, even as you was telling me before, just last year, you know, or even when you begin to use it. And that put it in mind too, you know, even what we're looking at today, you know, with the electrical pulse assigned to the body that kills all types of viruses, parasites, anything in the blood, etc., and brings it back to normality, that they haven't been exposing or telling to the people. Come to think of it, you know, that's applicable in this case.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because you'd be surprised, you know, we may discover that a lot of the blockages to good health that people suffer that are given other names has much to do with actually corruption of blood.
Yeah.
In the biological format. And logically, by them already knowing that, you know, what she may refer to the doctors, they really already knew.
Yeah, so there's things that
it just hasn't been in their, would you say, business interest to say anything about it.
And
you're conscious of it.
Yes, you know, but I want to say this because this is not a medical device. Yeah. This is an educational device that educates you about what's going on with your body so that your body can heal itself. And that's one of the things I think, you know, a lot of us emotional. I mean, what we're going through over the last 2 years has been a barrage of an emotional assault. So people have emotional issues that are going on that are affecting them physically or physiologically. Yeah. And so, you know, we have to get out of the fear and out of all of the, you know, the lack of this and the lack of that. And this thing helps you know what's going on, and even goes into your deep subconscious and it tells you what's going on with your bones, your DNA, your this, your that, your blood. So I just want to give, like I said, give back, you know, because I've done, I do them distant. That's the beauty. They don't have to be here to get it done. And they'll know what's going on.
You know, that's interesting because really when you analyze its function and what I've seen, you know, you function with it even as it is.
Right.
That it is demonstrating the dimensionality of the beings.
Right. Right. It's just
it's actually addressing the dimensional nature, the multi-dimensional nature of things.
Right, right. And so that's what we want to, I know someone might be saying, what are they talking about? But I'm going to put this up here because I want all the AO scan. But you keep talking for just a few. So
you know, because you know it also demonstrates a metaphysical truth about us, truthfully. You know, like say for instance, if someone, you know, asks you to scan, right? They would look at that. The first impression would be the effectiveness of it as a technological instrument. Yet, when you really think about it, it is an instrumentality and the nature of which deals with the dimensional nature of the being, which is how we don't think of ourselves as being. And logically, anyone that really does any research into the human genome, etc., would have to know that. Therefore, the so-called medical doctors of the industry have to have already known about this.
Well, the other part of this that makes it so unique is that once it is educating you about what's going on, it has the ability to send out frequencies to help change what might be out of balance.
Yes,
And
so
that's the thing. So it doesn't just tell you.
even with the nature of that isn't referencing the dimensionality of the vibrational nature of the chakra energy cycles.
It does all that.
Because we're all energy.
It'll tell you where your chakras are, your meridians,
yes.
you know, all of this stuff. So it is. So, but I just, like I said, we appreciate. That's right. Somebody says I use my AO scanner to clean and imprint objects too. Yeah, I use my AO scanner to clear the energy around me and to shield me. But so, anywho, yeah. So you might be interested in getting one. Well, there's no 50% off of getting one. I'm just talking about for those of you who don't have your own AO scan and want the services of having a scan and then having energetic frequencies sent to you. For I will also include playlists so that, you know, like after I saw my sister, I created a playlist for everything I saw that was an issue. And so I'm going back to see her maybe on Saturday, maybe tomorrow or Sunday, so that I expect to see a change since Tuesday.
From an educational level, you're coming from an educational level to an erudition level,
right?
Which is really, really good. And not only that, you know, that gives pause to really, you know, having a greater appreciation of this technology being exposed.
Absolutely. And another thing, I'm just going to switch the subject since we still have about 700 plus folk on here. I want to say that there's some of you out there when it comes to technology that work some of these, you know, de facto corporations and create the technology of having, you know, like platforms and so forth. I'm challenging that somebody's out there. There are some of us out there could create our own platform, a social media platform that allows us to put our information out without being shadow banned, without being shut down and denied the opportunity to share and to communicate
outside of Indexus Librorum Prohibitorum, Indexus Librorum Expurgatorius, which is actually what shadow banning is coming from, which is Doctrine of Discovery, operative right to this day.
Absolutely. So with that, and thank you, Sister Isis L. Thank you that you're using the AO scanner to help, you know, your friends and kinfolk. I appreciate that. And Tisha Caldwell, you can just the same number that you call for text for the if you want to scan, you can text and just get the information on how to get your own scanner. I'm going to put that up. I'm going to run that for just a minute and let you see that 50% off of the scanner. And I even made a little banner, Grand Sheik. I made a little banner while we're here. You're still sitting there, right? Yeah. So let me figure this out. Let me see how I can do this. I'm going to put it. Okay, so it's over your face. I call it Dr. G's Solar Return AO Scan Special. 50% off a complete scan between the beginning of March and the end of March, because I'm going to celebrate my solar return all month. My actual solar return is on the 17th, but for the month of March, if you would like to get a scan for you or a loved one, please reach out to me. And I can do about 2 a day because it's intense. When I do it, I spend a couple of hours with each of my client. Oh yeah, and we'll do it face to face online, so that and so you don't have to be here physically. Yeah, you know, and you will get reports for everything we do. So if you are interested, you can scan. You can use that same number if you're just interested in knowing about the scanner, about getting one for yourself. It is amazing. And with that, Hopefully you see that. Cannot leave without talking about Chokeberry. About Chokeberry. As we leave here, we're going to talk about Chokeberry, which is amazing. It's just amazing. I'm just happy that folks are seeing the results that they are with the Chokeberry. And so with that, I'm trying to do a whole bunch of things at the same time. Like
Dr. T here, just checking to see if you've ordered your Chokeberry Plus. What? You don't know what Chokeberry Plus is? Oh my. It is an amazing berry that has the highest ORAC level of most berries known to man. Actually, it's a step higher than elderberry and is much, much higher than berries such as noni, goji, and mangosteen. What is chokeberry, you ask? Well, chokeberry is an antiviral, it's antioxidant, and it's an immune system boosting berry. It also provides support and balance for the blood pressure, the blood sugar, and cholesterol. Yeah, in one little dose that you would take a day that's very pleasant tasting, like a glass of fine wine, you are going to provide yourself with a lot of protection, especially in these times that we're living in. Like I said, it's antiviral, antioxidant, and anti-inflammatory, among the balanced support that it provides for the blood sugar, the blood pressure, and the cholesterol. You want to know how you can get yours? Sure. Just text CB3L to 302-345-0500, and we'll shoot you out an order link. You want to get yours today. Especially in these times we're living in, we need some added support and protection. So I highly recommend Chokeberry Plus. And let me say this, Chokeberry Plus, and the chokeberry is also what's known as the aronia berry. But all of the chokeberry products out there are not created equal. We've got probably the best tasting, and you feel it the moment it hits your taste buds, and it actually does some things as soon as it hits your mouth. I'm not going to talk about that, but it's going to be good for you, good for your family. You can get a 60 serving 3-liter box shipped out within 2 to 3 days, and it's going to come by priority mail insured. So again, text CB3L to 302-345-0500 and get your chokeberry today. Peace.
thank you for meeting today. Out of here.
Deeper and deeper I go. I find what it is I should know. It's just a matter of time. You'll reawaken your mind. Oh, come with me, come to know and find out what is true. Then you know what's in store just for you. No more living the life I can look to the sky and say, I'm reawakening mine. Come to know and find out what is true. Yeah. And you know what's in store just for you. No more living a lie. I can look to the sky and say, I'm reawakening mine.